Shall we move on to another good movie with conspiracy theory?
No, we shan't. Right, to be clear, lunatic conspiracy nut cab driver hunted by MIBs for knowing too much, but which of his theories is it, is a great setup movie for a movie. A great setup. That's it. I remember renting Conspiracy Theory back in the day and hating it, as well as finding it incredibly confusing. I now realise I wasn't confused, more likely bored out of my skull by it. I must have not yet nurtured my disdain for Julia Roberts back then, and I have since set it aside, which is good. I feel really sorry for her after revisiting the movie now. Well, as sorry as I can feel for a fated multimillionaire afforded the adoration of the masses upon some bizarre pedestal out with my understanding. Julia...
We need to cover her
Have
films.
you really set it aside, Craig? Julia plays Alice Sutton, an employee of the government, or some arm thereof, which it is being something I neither care to remember nor are convinced is ever actually made clear in the movie. Alice is being stalked by Jerry Fletcher, a cabbie whose perception of reality is distorted ever so slightly by his bizarre desire to imagine conspiracy theories of every act he reads of in the press, no matter how seemingly trivial. It's all connected, man. Jerry's histrionics seem of bafflingly little concern to Alice, even at the point at which he strides into her place of work and starts waving around a gun he just stole from a security guard. Oh, that Jerry. Jerry, of course, sees men in trench coats everywhere, but at some point, one of them actually turns out to harbour nefarious intent, cudgelling Jerry and bundling him into a van. Whereupon he is tortured for info by shadowy figures in a scene that would love to think it's from the movie Marathon Man, but sadly is not. One narrow Looney Tunes escape scene later, Jerry somehow convinces Alice the woman he has been stalking and in whose work he has been waving a gun around to come back to his apartment so he can explain conspiracy stuff. Run away, Alice! Of course, armed figures in black break up the party, and Alice is eventually convinced that Jerry is not entirely a raving lunatic, and I really wish I'd put Swivel-Eyed in there. There's a point midway through where the movie suddenly threatens to be interesting in relation to an act that intertwines Jerry's past with that of Alice, but then everyone involved remembers that it's 1997, and somehow we have to have the leads fall in love to some degree, so that idea gets canned. Here's a sentence I never thought I'd find myself recounting. Julia Roberts is criminally underserved by this movie. And you heard me right. She remains a passenger to Jerry, both figuratively and literally, for much of the duration, except toward the end, whereupon she is, for mere seconds, required to convey the emotion of being quite upset, at which point she outacts the entire rest of the cast for the entire preceding duration of the movie in 3 seconds flat. To be clear, Julia Roberts is the thing I find least egregious about this movie. So, for Mel, sweet anti-Semitic Mel, a man we have discussed at some length previously on this podcast and whom we all agreed has probably paid his penance now. I've changed my mind. Mel Gibson can act, just not in this movie. Yes. Here we find him doing that annoying Three Stooges manic routine that director Donner fostered in him through the Lethal Weapon movies. Yes. Only here, against Roberts, it is thrown into stark relief for the sad, schoolyard-grade gurning that it is.
So out of place.
Yes. The only person who thinks Mel Gibson is entertaining doing this shtick is Mel Gibson. And there is one moment in particular that made me cringe in embarrassment at how out of depth he is. There's also a moment early on of fantastic casual racism that now, in hindsight, is awfully hard to ignore. After crushing a cockroach in his sink, Jerry mutters, "Return to sender," before tossing the dead bug into an empty Chinese takeout carton. No, Jerry, it's there because you're a filthy with a sink that hasn't been emptied and dishes washed in weeks. Anywho, this movie starts and ends with a paranoid obsessive delusionist stalking an entirely innocent woman and wants to skull 2 hours of your time in between trying to convince you that you ought to empathise with him. This movie watched Blue Thunder and thought helicopters having a whisper mode is an actual thing. This movie drowns in stupid assertions, then cut itself shaving with Occam's razor. Admittedly, this movie does also have a gibberish-spouting dude in a wheelchair biting off Patrick Stewart's nose, which is a thing Patrick Stewart must have known when he signed his contract. Still, as the Dream Warriors once sang, Who is more a fool? Who is more a fool? The fool or the fool who knew this movie was crap for the last 21 years, told everyone as much in the Slack group, but then, for some reason, argued the case for its inclusion on the podcast anyway? I think we all know the answer to that one. According to IMDb trivia, Richard Donner first gave writer Brian Helgeland work after seeing him standing outside the studio gates with a sign reading, "Will work for food. I really hope he got paid in food. Preferably a takeout carton full of dead cockroaches."
Brian Helgeland's output in 1997 is this, The Postman, and Ellie Confidential. What?
I don't understand this world anymore, Scott.
One of these films is not like the others.
IMDb, which also lists this film's rating, is 6.7 out of 10. So
So it's wrong. Yeah.
yes,
Can we all agree on this one?
yeah, oh yes, I think so. I also rented this around about when it was released in video back in 1997, 1988. Unlike you, Craig, though, I was quite fortunate is that I remembered sod all about it till I went back to watch it. So
The only thing I remembered was I hated it, and that image of the power station, the 3 stacks.
I remembered pretty much nothing about it. So when you mentioned it, and I was like, I know Scott mentioned this as a potential one, conspiracy theory, it's like the name meant nothing to me at all. And then I looked at it, it's like, oh, right, yeah. I remember that. And it's like, the biggest problem with this film is it commits the cardinal sin of cinema.
Be careful, mate, because if you're going to say the biggest fault with this movie, I don't know that I could pick it from the multitude.
It's boring. It's just so boring.
It really is.
I mean, it doesn't start well too. It's like, I mean, I agree with every single thing you say, Craig, except I just wasn't angry. I was just bored. I just wanted it to end. I was like, oh, I'm committed to watching it now. I'll have to. And it's really strange bits to it, like that ridiculous thing of Mel Gibson escaping from that building in the wheelchair, making noises like Sloth from Goonies. And then I thought, wait a minute, this is a Richard Donner version. Maybe he's actually making noises like Sloth from Goonies.
And then crying about gravy.
Between that and it's one of the earlier scenes as well where they're just introducing his obvious mental illness, but there's chirpy big band music playing over the top of it, so it's happy mental illness.
I was struck by the inappropriateness of the music, actually,
Carter Burwell's score is from an entirely different film.
And it's just, there's also the whole fact that he had anything to do with her story at all. So you can see it coming a mile off, but it doesn't make any sense.
No.
And
it's sad because it's a great setup. You can take that basic concept and there'd be a great movie to be made there. A really good movie. Certainly not this one.
Yes.
Do you know what I loved about the helicopters? Do you know what I loved about the helicopters as well? Because I edited myself for comic effect and I kept that short, but I need to go back. This helicopter whisper mode thing, right? Helicopter's got a whisper mode. Bit of a stretch, right? I've double checked this in the meantime. I've done my research. And the best that they can do by creating the craziest shaped blades you've ever seen on a helicopter in your life is reduce the noise of a helicopter by about 3 decibels. So let's stop talking about whisper mode. But not only is it whisper mode, the helicopter hovers 40 feet above a busy New York street and armed men in tactical gear rappel out of it and nobody notices. So it's also invisible.
It's New York. They noticed, they just didn't care.
well, what I was going to say, Craig, before you started there, was everything you've just said. I was going to say, well done, pick up the helicopter thing. That bothered me too. Why doesn't anybody see it? Wasn't he invisible?
Yeah. No one's noticing the downdraft. No one's noticing the guys rappelling down in front of their eyes. It's just a thing.
I mean, I know, like, there is that trope, exactly like Scott said. It was like New Yorkers don't care, right? And films like Gremlins 2 kind of play on that. It's like until
this evidence they ought to.
Until Murray getting attacked by the flying gremlin outside starts bothering them, they're not noticing anything at all. But that's a film kind of being satirical about that. This film is taking it seriously. It's like, no. Yeah, it's just so dull.
And Gibson is terrible.
Oh, he's really awful.
His performance is so bad.
Exactly. You took the words out of my mouth had I had them ready, Craig, with that, the whole Three Stooges bit that he's doing, which sort of fits with Riggs in Lethal Weapon. But in this film, yeah, it's so out of place and it's embarrassing.
It's the bits of Riggs that didn't work for 2 hours
Yeah.
and turned up to 11 in places. It's really, really bad, and it doesn't work. And that bit where after he's been waving the gun around and he curls up in Julia Roberts' arms on the floor and goes, "Oh, I'm going to go to sleep," and then goes, and I'm like, oh my God. I was like, this is so embarrassing that you're a grown man in the arms of a grown woman playing pretend, and this was the thing you did in front of everyone. And God knows what the other take, I mean, because presumably there wasn't just one take of that. God knows what the other takes looked like if that was the one that everybody agreed was the best. But I mean, you could say that about a good many scenes in this. That's really weird, is that this movie has kind of forced me to reevaluate my opinion of Julia Roberts. There you go. It served a purpose. But this is bad. This is really bad.
Yes. What an absolute dung heap.
Well, rather than spending any more time on this dung heap, Scott, will we move on to
Yes, let's get off the dung heap.
Let us not sit atop the dung heap.